For nearly a century, modern agriculture has operated under a simple and comforting belief. If you feed the plant will reward you. Nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, NPK became the operating system of industrial farming. It simplified soil into numbers. It transformed fertility into formulas. And it gave agriculture something farmers desperately needed after generations of uncertainty: predictability. Universities built entire agronomy programs around nutrient ratios. Extension agents carried charts instead of shovels. Soil tests became prescriptions. Fertility stopped being biological and became mathematical. And for a while, it looked like humanity had finally solved farming. Yields climbed year after year. Corn production exploded. Wheat fields expanded across continents. Equipment grew larger, faster, more efficient. Fertilizer allowed marginal land to become productive almost overnight. Farmers didn't adopt synthetic fertilizers because they were careless. They adopted them because they worked. But here's the uncomfortable truth few people inside the industry want to admit. NPK never actually solved soil fertility. It bypassed it. Modern agriculture didn't fix the soil. It replaced the soil's natural function with chemical intervention. And slowly, almost invisibly, something underneath began to change. Because soil was never just dirt. Long before fertilizer plants existed, long before ammonia synthesis and phosphate mining, crops were already growing at massive scales in natural ecosystems. Prairies produced enormous biomass without fertilizer trucks. Forests recycled nutrients indefinitely. Native grasslands sustained productivity for thousands of years without external inputs. So the real question isn't how fertilizers made farming possible. The real question is this: what system was already doing the job before fertilizers arrived? Beneath every productive natural ecosystem exists an invisible infrastructure far more complex than any machine agriculture has ever built. Billions of microorganisms per handful of soil. Bacteria trading nutrients. Fungi transporting minerals across meters of underground networks. Protozoa regulating nutrient release. Microbial predators maintaining biological balance. Together, they form what scientists now call the soil microbiome. And this microbiome functions as a living nutrient management system. Plants do not primarily absorb nutrients from raw soil minerals. They negotiate for them. Through root exudates, plants release sugars into the soil, feeding microbes. In exchange, microbial communities mine nutrients locked inside soil particles and deliver them directly to plant roots. It is not extraction, it is trade. For millions of years, agriculture operated on this biological marketplace. Then industrial farming unintentionally broke the negotiation. When highly soluble synthetic fertilizers are applied year after year, plants stop investing energy into microbial partnerships. Why trade carbon with fungi when nutrients arrive instantly dissolved in water? The plant adapts. Roots become shallower. Microbial diversity declines. Fungal networks collapse. And slowly, soil transitions from a living ecosystem into an inert growing medium. At first, yields remain high, because chemistry compensates for biology. But dependency begins forming. More fertilizer becomes necessary to maintain the same output. Organic matter declines. Water infiltration worsens. Nutrient efficiency drops. Input costs rise. Farmers respond logically. They apply more nutrients, which accelerates the cycle. What looks like productivity is often biological bankruptcy being masked by chemical credit. And like any debt system, repayment eventually arrives. Across major agricultural regions, farmers now report identical patterns. Higher fertilizer rates producing smaller yield responses. Phosphorus buildup in soils without improved plant uptake. Nitrogen losses increasing despite precision application. Soils becoming harder, less resilient, more drought sensitive. The industry's explanation usually points toward weather variability or genetics. But an alternative explanation is gaining attention among soil scientists and experienced producers alike. The limiting factor may no longer be nutrients. It may be biology, because one of the biggest misconceptions in modern agriculture is the belief that soils lack phosphorus. In reality, most agricultural soils contain enormous phosphorus reserves accumulated over decades of fertilizer application. The problem is availability. Up to 80% of soil phosphorus becomes chemically locked, unavailable to crops. Farmers continue purchasing phosphorus not because soil lacks it, but because plants cannot access what already exists. And access is not controlled by chemistry alone. It is controlled by microbes. Certain fungal species extend microscopic filaments far beyond root zones, accessing mineral surfaces unreachable by plants. These networks dissolve bound phosphorus using organic acids and enzymatic processes developed through evolutionary time. They unlock nutrients already paid for years ago. But these fungal systems are fragile. Heavy disturbance, continuous chemical saturation, and lack of biological diversity suppress their development. Modern farming unintentionally disabled the very engine responsible for nutrient efficiency, which leads to a radical possibility. What if the future of profitable agriculture is not adding more inputs, but reactivating the biological systems that eliminate the need for them? This is not a return to primitive farming. It is not ideology, and it is not anti-technology. It represents a shift from input-driven agriculture to efficiency-driven agriculture. From feeding plants directly, to rebuilding the underground economy that feeds them naturally. Because the most valuable asset on a farm may not be machinery, genetics, or fertilizer access. It may be the living network beneath your boots. If modern agriculture has a blind spot, it exists underground. Not in nutrient charts, not in satellite imagery, not in yield monitors, but in a biological infrastructure so vast that a single acre of healthy soil can contain miles of living fungal networks working continuously beneath the surface. For decades, farmers were taught to see roots as the primary drivers of nutrient uptake. But roots were never designed to work alone. In natural systems, plants outsource most nutrient acquisition to fungi. These organisms form symbiotic relationships known as mycorrhizal associations, connecting directly to plant roots and extending microscopic filaments called hyphae deep into surrounding soil. And these filaments change everything. A plant root can only explore a limited soil volume. Nutrient availability depends on physical contact between root and mineral particles. Fungal networks remove that limitation. Hyphae are up to 100 times thinner than plant roots. They penetrate soil pores inaccessible to roots, extracting phosphorus, zinc, copper, and water from areas plants could never reach alone. In exchange, plants transfer liquid carbon. Sugars produced during photosynthesis flow underground, feeding fungal partners. Up to 40% of a plant's total energy production can be allocated to this biological trade system. That number alone should force a question modern agronomy rarely asks. Why would plants spend nearly half their energy feeding microbes unless the return on investment was enormous? Because fungi do something fertilizers cannot. They deliver nutrients precisely when and where plants need them. Synthetic fertilizers flood soil solution with soluble nutrients regardless of plant demand. Losses occur immediately through leaching, volatilization, or chemical fixation. Fungal delivery systems operate differently. They function as targeted supply chains. Nutrients remain biologically stored until plants signal demand through root exudates. Delivery becomes synchronized with growth stages instead of rainfall events. Efficiency increases dramatically. Research now shows that biologically active soils can achieve comparable productivity using significantly lower nutrient inputs, simply because nutrient cycling accelerates. But this system depends on continuity, and modern agriculture unintentionally disrupted it. Deep tillage physically tears fungal networks apart. Each pass through the field resets biological infrastructure that may have taken months to establish. High-salt fertilizer environments suppress fungal colonization. Certain fungicides further reduce microbial diversity. Long fallow periods starve soil organisms of carbon energy. The result is not immediate failure. It is gradual biological erosion. At first, crops compensate using soluble nutrients. Yield remains stable, nothing appears wrong, but underground cooperation disappears. Soil begins losing aggregation, organic matter declines, water infiltration slows, nutrient retention weakens. Farmers notice symptoms rather than causes. Fields dry faster during drought. Heavy rain creates runoff instead of absorption. Fertilizer response becomes inconsistent. Inputs increase again, which deepens dependency. This creates what soil ecologists now describe as the chemical dependency cycle. Each year requires slightly more intervention to maintain identical performance. Not because farmers are inefficient, but because biology has been replaced by chemistry. And chemistry alone cannot replicate ecosystem function. One of the most overlooked consequences involves phosphorus efficiency. Phosphorus is notoriously immobile in soil. Once applied, it rapidly binds with calcium, iron, or aluminum compounds depending on soil type. Large reserves accumulate over decades, yet plants still show deficiency symptoms. Why? Because plants cannot chemically extract bound phosphorus efficiently. Fungi can. Mycorrhizal fungi release organic acids capable of dissolving mineral bonds, freeing phosphorus locked for years or even decades. In biologically active soils, legacy phosphorus becomes available again, meaning farmers may already own much of the fertility they continue purchasing annually. This realization changes the economic equation of agriculture. The question shifts from, how much fertilizer do I need? How much fertility already exists but remains biologically inaccessible? Across multiple farming regions, producers experimenting with biological soil activation report similar transitions. Fertilizer rates begin stabilizing, yield variability decreases, water use efficiency improves, crop resilience increases under stress. None of this happens overnight, because rebuilding microbial systems resembles rebuilding infrastructure after abandonment. Biology must be fed before it performs, which introduces the most misunderstood concept in soil health discussions. Plants are not passive nutrient recipients. They are ecosystem engineers. Through root exudates, plants actively shape microbial communities around them. Different crops recruit different microbial populations, influencing nutrient cycling capacity season after season. Monoculture limits microbial diversity. Diverse rotations expand biological function. Cover crops maintain continuous carbon flow, preventing microbial starvation between cash crops. What appears above ground as crop diversity becomes below ground as functional resilience. And resilience is rapidly becoming agriculture's most valuable asset, because climate volatility exposes the weakness of chemically dependent systems. When moisture fluctuates or temperatures spike, biological soils buffer stress more effectively than inert soils reliant on external inputs. The soil itself begins regulating extremes, which leads to a profound shift in perspective. Healthy soil is not simply fertile, it is self-regulating, self-repairing, self-feeding, and potentially self-sustaining. But activating this system requires abandoning one of industrial agriculture's deepest assumptions: that productivity must always be purchased externally. Every farmer eventually asks the same question: if biology is so powerful, why doesn't every field already function this way? Because biological systems do not disappear dramatically. They fade quietly. Most modern agricultural soils are not dead. They are dormant. Decades of intensive management did not eliminate microbial life entirely. Instead, they reduced diversity, weakened cooperation, and interrupted energy flow. The engine still exists. It simply lacks fuel, and the fuel of soil biology is not fertilizer. It is carbon. This is where modern agriculture unintentionally reversed nature's operating logic. Traditional fertility programs focus almost exclusively on adding nutrients into soil. Nitrogen programs, phosphorus correction, potassium balancing, micronutrient supplementation. All input-driven, but biological systems operate under a different rule. Nutrients follow energy. Microbes require continuous carbon sources to function. Without living roots releasing sugars into the soil, microbial populations collapse rapidly. Bare soil periods, common across industrial agriculture, create biological starvation cycles lasting months each year. During these periods, microbial communities shrink dramatically. Fungal networks disconnect, nutrient cycling slows, so when the next crop is planted, farmers are effectively starting from biological zero again. Fertilizer compensates for the missing ecosystem, which explains one of agriculture's biggest paradoxes. Fields receiving the highest fertilizer rates often show the lowest biological efficiency. Because nutrients alone cannot rebuild life, energy must come first. This realization has quietly reshaped how some producers approach soil management. Instead of asking how to feed the crop, they ask how to feed the soil continuously. The transition begins with one principle: keep living roots in the ground as long as possible. Living plants act as biological pumps. Through photosynthesis, they capture atmospheric carbon and transfer a portion underground as root exudates. Sugars, amino acids, enzymes, and organic compounds leak into surrounding soil zones, feeding bacteria and fungi. In response, microbial populations expand rapidly, and something remarkable begins happening. Microbes start mining nutrients already present in soil minerals and organic matter. Nitrogen becomes biologically cycled instead of externally supplied. Phosphorus solubilization increases. Micronutrients previously unavailable enter plant uptake pathways. The soil shifts from storage mode into production mode. This process is often invisible during early stages. Farmers transitioning toward biological systems frequently report an adjustment period. Yields may remain stable rather than increase immediately. Soil structure changes gradually. Residue decomposition accelerates. Moisture retention improves season by season. But underneath, aggregation begins forming. Soil particles bind together through microbial glues known as polysaccharides and fungal hyphae. Aggregation creates pore space. Pore space allows oxygen movement. Oxygen enables aerobic microbial activity. And aerobic biology drives efficient nutrient cycling. Water infiltration improves dramatically. Instead of running off fields during storms, rainfall penetrates deeper into the profile. Stored moisture becomes available during dry periods. Drought resilience increases without irrigation expansion. This transformation redefines what fertility means. Fertility stops being something applied. It becomes something generated. One of the most powerful indicators of biological recovery appears in phosphorus dynamics. As fungal populations recover, legacy phosphorus accumulated from decades of fertilizer application begins re-entering biological circulation. Farmers often observe reduced phosphorus response despite lowering application rates. Not because crops require less nutrition, but because access improves. The soil starts paying back historical investments. Economically, this changes farm management decisions. Input reduction becomes gradual rather than risky. Synthetic fertilizers transition from primary nutrient sources into supplemental tools. Dependency weakens, margins improve, and perhaps most importantly, operational risk declines. Because biological systems buffer variability. In chemically dependent systems, productivity relies heavily on precise timing, favorable weather, and uninterrupted supply chains. Biological systems distribute risk internally. Microbial diversity stabilizes nutrient flow. Organic matter moderates temperature extremes. Soil structure protects against erosion and compaction. The farm becomes less sensitive to external shocks. And this resilience carries enormous financial implications. Modern agriculture increasingly operates under volatile fertilizer markets, fuel costs, and climate uncertainty. Profitability now depends as much on cost control as yield maximization. High-yield systems with escalating input costs often generate thinner margins than moderately optimized systems with strong biological efficiency. Which leads to a strategic realization spreading among experienced producers. Maximum yield does not always equal maximum profit. Biologically active soils frequently achieve competitive yields at significantly reduced input costs. Efficiency replaces intensity, and efficiency compounds over time. However, one major misconception still blocks widespread adoption. Many assume biological farming requires abandoning modern technology or returning to low-input traditional practices. The opposite is true. The most successful biological systems integrate modern agronomy with ecological function. Precision agriculture, data monitoring, advanced genetics, and adaptive nutrient management become more powerful when operating within living soils. Technology amplifies biology instead of replacing it, but activating these systems requires avoiding critical mistakes that unintentionally shut biology down again. Across North America, thousands of farmers have attempted to improve soil biology. Many invested in cover crops. Some reduced tillage, others experimented with biological products promising microbial miracles. And yet, a large percentage walked away disappointed. No yield increase, no visible soil transformation, no reduction in fertilizer dependency. So the conclusion seemed obvious. Soil biology doesn't work here. But biology rarely fails overnight. Management expectations do. One of the biggest misunderstandings in modern agriculture is treating biological transition like a chemical adjustment. Farmers are used to immediate responses. Apply nitrogen, crops green within days. Apply herbicide, weeds die quickly. Apply fungicide, disease pressure drops. Chemical systems deliver rapid visual confirmation. Biological systems operate on timelines measured in seasons, not days. Because rebuilding soil biology means rebuilding population dynamics, structural networks, and energy cycles simultaneously. And this process can be easily disrupted. The first major failure point is partial adoption. Many operations introduce cover crops while maintaining management practices that suppress microbial recovery. Heavy tillage following biological gains destroys fungal networks before they stabilize. Long fallow periods eliminate microbial food sources. Excessive synthetic salt concentrations inhibit colonization. Biology begins rebuilding, then gets reset repeatedly. Imagine constructing infrastructure that is demolished every year before completion. Progress never compounds. Another critical mistake involves nutrient shock. When farmers attempt aggressive fertilizer reduction too early, crops experience temporary nutrient stress before biological cycling becomes fully functional. Yields decline, confidence collapses. The system gets blamed instead of the transition speed. Successful biological operators rarely eliminate synthetic inputs immediately. They taper dependency gradually. Fertilizer becomes support rather than foundation. Biology expands while productivity remains protected. The transition resembles shifting power sources in an operating factory rather than shutting electricity off entirely. Continuity matters. The second failure point involves misunderstanding microbial inoculants. The agricultural marketplace is now flooded with biological products claiming to rebuild soil instantly. Bacteria blends, fungal extracts, enzyme packages. Some are scientifically valid, many are context dependent, but none function without habitat. Adding microbes into degraded soil without carbon supply, aggregation, and environmental stability resembles releasing livestock into a desert without feed or water. Introduced organisms rarely survive. Native microbial populations already exist in most soils. Management determines whether they thrive. Biology is activated more often through environment creation than organism introduction, which leads to a hard truth. There is no shortcut replacing ecological function. The third failure point is monoculture persistence. Even reduced tillage systems struggle biologically when crop diversity remains limited. Different plant species release different root exudates. These exudates recruit specialized microbial communities performing unique nutrient transformations. Diverse rotations expand microbial capability. Single species dominance narrows biological function. Soils become efficient at supporting one crop temporarily but fragile under stress. Nature never builds resilience through uniformity. Agriculture often tries. Another overlooked factor involves residue management. Crop residue is frequently viewed as waste needing rapid breakdown or removal. Biologically active systems treat residue as infrastructure. Surface residues moderate soil temperature, reduce evaporation, and provide continuous microbial food sources. Residue becomes insulation for underground ecosystems. Fields lacking protective cover experience extreme temperature swings capable of suppressing microbial activity even when moisture and nutrients remain adequate. Biology requires stability. Modern equipment efficiency unintentionally works against this principle. Clean fields look productive. Living fields function productively. These are not always identical. Perhaps the most damaging misconception concerns patience. Industrial agriculture conditioned decision-making around annual performance metrics. Biological systems reward multi-year consistency. The most significant improvements often appear between years 3 and 5 of continuous biological management. Soil organic matter begins rising measurably. Fertilizer efficiency improves noticeably. Yield stability strengthens across weather extremes. Early adopters frequently describe a tipping point. At first, management feels experimental. Then suddenly, fields begin behaving differently. Water disappears into soil instead of running off. Crops maintain color longer under stress. Input response becomes predictable again. The soil starts working with the farmer instead of requiring constant correction. And this shift introduces something rarely discussed in modern agriculture: managerial freedom. As biological dependency replaces chemical dependency, operational pressure declines. Timing windows widen. Weather risks soften. Input purchasing urgency decreases. The farm becomes less reactive, more strategic. But reaching this stage requires understanding one final principle. Soil biology is not an alternative system. It is the original system agriculture replaced. For most of modern agricultural history, success followed a simple equation: increase yield, spread fixed costs, buy efficiency through inputs. And for decades, that model worked. Fertilizers were affordable, fuel was predictable, supply chains were stable, margins rewarded expansion and intensity. But agriculture has entered a different era. Input volatility now rivals weather risk. Fertilizer prices fluctuate globally. Energy markets influence production costs overnight. Supply disruptions travel across continents faster than planting seasons can adjust. Farm profitability is no longer determined only by production. It is determined by dependency. Operations requiring constant external inputs operate under permanent exposure to forces they cannot control. And this is where biological agriculture stops being philosophical and becomes financial strategy. Because biological efficiency fundamentally changes cost structure. Instead of purchasing fertility annually, farmers begin regenerating fertility internally. Instead of increasing application rates, nutrient cycling improves utilization. Instead of correcting soil problems repeatedly, ecosystems stabilize themselves. The economic impact compounds quietly. Reduced fertilizer demand lowers annual operating costs. Improved water infiltration decreases drought losses. Soil aggregation reduces compaction-related yield variability. Profit margins widen not through higher yields, but through lower vulnerability. This distinction matters more than ever. Many of the most financially resilient farms today are not those achieving record yields every season. They are those maintaining consistent performance under unpredictable conditions. Consistency beats peak performance. Biologically active soils function as shock absorbers. During excessive rainfall, structured soil prevents nutrient loss. During drought, organic matter retains moisture. During temperature stress, microbial activity moderates root zone conditions. Risk spreads across biological processes instead of concentrating in purchased inputs. And risk management defines modern profitability. Another economic shift emerges through legacy nutrient recovery. Decades of phosphorus and micronutrient applications remain stored within agricultural soils worldwide. Biological activation converts these reserves into usable fertility. Farmers begin drawing from nutrients already paid for years earlier. Input reduction becomes less about sacrifice and more about optimization. Capital previously allocated to fertilizer purchases can be redirected toward equipment upgrades, debt reduction, or operational flexibility. The farm balance sheet changes. But perhaps the most profound transformation occurs in decision-making psychology. Chemical dependency creates urgency. Fertilizer must arrive on time. Applications must match narrow weather windows. Missed timing carries immediate consequences. Biological systems expand tolerance. Timing flexibility increases. Soil buffering reduces penalties from imperfect conditions. Management stress declines. Farmers regain control over operations increasingly dominated by external uncertainty. And this may explain why some of the most experienced producers transitioning toward biological systems describe an unexpected outcome. Farming becomes enjoyable again, less reactive, less fragile, more predictable. This does not mean synthetic inputs disappear. Modern agriculture will continue using fertilizers, genetics, and technology. But their role changes. Inputs become precision tools rather than life support systems. Technology begins amplifying biology instead of compensating for its absence. The future farm integrates data analytics, precision placement, automation, and biological management into a unified system focused on efficiency rather than intensity. Because the next agricultural revolution will likely not come from bigger machinery or stronger chemistry. It will come from understanding that soil is not a medium, it is an ecosystem, and ecosystems, once functional, generate productivity continuously. The farmers who recognize this shift early gain something increasingly rare in agriculture. Independence. Independence from volatile markets. Independence from escalating input cycles. Independence from diminishing fertilizer response curves. The transition beyond NPK does not reject modern farming. It completes it. Industrial agriculture mastered production. Biological agriculture masters sustainability of production. Together, they form the model capable of feeding future populations while maintaining economic viability for producers themselves. Because the real secret buried beneath every successful farm is not found in fertilizer blends or application maps. It exists in the living network beneath the soil surface, waiting to be reactivated, and the farmers who learn to manage that invisible workforce may ultimately discover the most powerful competitive advantage agriculture has ever known. Not more inputs, but a system that no longer depends on them.